All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most fundamental concepts in biology, something we all think we know, the role of DNA. But it turns out the real story is so much more fascinating and way more complex than you probably imagine.
So let's kick things off with what most of us picked up in biology class. On one hand, you have the idea, this neat, tidy, straight line process. And on the other hand, you have the reality, which, as scientists are digging in, looks a whole lot more like a giant question mark. Yeah, that simple story, it's really starting to come apart at the seams.
Okay, so that brings us to our first big idea here, the DNA blueprint myth. We're going to unpack that simple story we were all taught, the one that paints DNA as the master plan, the central software that's running the entire show. Right at the core of that story is something called the central dogma of molecular biology, and it's a beautifully simple idea. DNA has all the instructions. Those instructions get copied or transcribed into RNA, and then that RNA is used to build the proteins that make up, well, us. It's supposed to be a one-way street of information. Or so we think.
But, as molecular biologists started looking closer and closer, they realized this neat little picture, it just doesn't add up. They started finding all these cracks in the code, and it revealed a process that is anything but straightforward. Let's dive into what they actually found.
Okay, so this is where that simple straight line idea just gets blown out of the water. Get this, a single gene isn't always one neat little package. Its parts can literally be scattered across completely different chromosomes. Then you've got these complex molecular machines that come in and literally cut up and rearrange the information from the DNA. And it doesn't stop there. Even after the code is read, individual chemical letters can be altered. And maybe the craziest part, the DNA itself isn't some static library. It actually gets rearranged and changed as an organism develops. So all this editing, cutting, and rearranging, it begs a huge question, right? If the genetic code is constantly being rewritten and modified, what's controlling the modifiers? What's telling these incredibly complex machines what to cut, where to paste it, and when to make changes? And that's where we hit this classic problem. It's a logical trap called an infinite regress. If you say, oh, well, another molecule controls the editing, you immediately have to ask the next question. Okay, but what controls that molecule? You see the problem? It's this never-ending turtles all the way down situation. Every single time you propose a controller, you need another controller for that one, and another for the one after that. The hunt for a single ultimate master controller at the molecular level starts to look, well, basically impossible. And this is exactly where that popular analogy just completely falls apart. You can't say DNA is the software and the cell is the hardware if the hardware is constantly reaching in and rewriting the software on the fly. The distinction between the program and the computer just dissolves. Now, if it's that complicated inside just one cell, imagine zooming out to the mind-boggling puzzle of building a whole organism. The problem gets exponentially bigger. To really get our heads around this, let's use an analogy we'll call the impossible marching band. Imagine this scene. You've got 10,000 people in a giant field, and they are all blindfolded. Their job is to walk in perfect formation to create a detailed map of the state of California. And here's the kicker. They get all of their instructions just once, right at the very beginning. Then, they're on their own. So seriously, just think about it for a second. Once they start walking with zero feedback and no way to see where they are or where anyone else is going, what do you think the final result is going to look like? I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? The tiniest error at the start. Someone takes a step that's a millimeter too long. It just gets magnified with every single step. These little errors compound, and by the end, you wouldn't have a map of California. You'd have an absolute mess. And that is a brilliant picture of the problem in developing embryo faces if it's just trying to follow a pre-programmed script. So what this whole marching band thing tells us is that a simple, preloaded blueprint just won't cut it. It's not enough to build something as complex as a living thing. There has to be some kind of constant, top-down guidance, a system that is always correcting the course, putting things back on track at every single stage. Okay, so if life isn't just running on a simple piece of software, what's a better way to think about it? For that, we can turn to Oxford physiologist Dennis Noble, who came up with this really powerful and elegant analogy, the organist and the organ. Here's how it works. Think of the genome, all of our DNA, as the pipes in a giant old cathedral organ.
They are absolutely essential, of course. You can't make music without them. But by themselves, they're just sitting there, totally passive. The organist, though, that's the organism itself, the living system as a whole. It's the active player that decides which pipes to use, when to use them, and what kind of pattern to play. As Noble puts it, thinking the genome alone determines the organism is just as absurd as thinking the organ pipes determine the music. The crucial point is that the potential is in the pipes, sure, but the performance, the pattern, the actual song of life, that comes from the organist. And this brings us to this really cool idea he calls biological relativity. So forget that simple bottom-up chain of command where genes call all the shots. What we really have is a complex hierarchy. And notice the arrows here, they go both up and down. Control is a two-way street. What this really means is that, yeah, genes influence tissues, but the tissues, the organs, and even the entire system are sending messages back down the chain, influencing which genes get used. Your heart, as an organ, is telling the genes inside its cells what to do. The whole circulatory system, in turn, tells the heart how to behave. It's this incredible dynamic dance where every level is influencing every other level.
So, what does all this mean? Where do we land after all this? This is what we call life beyond the blueprint, and it really changes how we have to think about, well, ourselves. So let's wrap up with the big takeaways here. First off, that whole DNA as software model, it's a handy starting point, but it's a major oversimplification. Second, control in biology isn't a one-way street. It's a complex, multi-level, two-way hierarchy. Third, the organism as a whole is the one in the driver's seat. It's the organist that actively directs its own development. And that leads to the biggest point of all. The complete information for life isn't just squirreled away in the genome. It's distributed throughout the entire living system. And that leaves us with one last, really mind-bending question to chew on. If the complete plan for a living thing isn't just written in the code of our DNA, then where exactly is it? It's a question that pushes us to the very edge of biology and challenges our definition of what life even is.